say fight back!
So every week we do a special video for supporters of our program. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. And, it's a private video. And this week I'm talking about the relationship between Donald Trump and Fox News. Trump's recent liberate these states with Democratic governors tweets, which seem to be actually calling for like armed revolt or asking, his crazy followers to let's send some pipe bombs or something like one already has to Democrats. He did that 2 minutes after watching a Fox News segment basically saying the same thing. Fox News is programming the brain of the president, and their programming was, basically developed by Roger Ailes to infuriate people. This outrage as a way of holding people so that they can sell advertising. And it's doing harm to our republic. You can check the whole thing out, the whole new video, over at thomhartmann.com.
This is, our book today is Playing with Fire, the 1968 Election and the Transformation of American Politics by Lawrence O'Donnell. The first chapter, Seizing the Moment. It starts in 1968. Richard Nixon was in a makeup chair when he met Roger Ailes. Maybe it was the makeup chair that set Ailes off. He was looking at the man who might have been president right now if he had just sat in the makeup chair CBS offered him in Chicago before the first televised presidential debate in American history. Nixon had ignored the network's makeup artist and used a drugstore product called Lazy Shave to cover his heavy 5 o'clock shadow. Nixon once said, "I can shave within 30 seconds before I go on television and still have a beard." The day after the debate, the Chicago Daily News ran the headline, "Was Nixon sabotaged by TV makeup artists?" Richard Daley, the all-powerful Democratic mayor of Chicago, said, "My God, they've embalmed him even before he died." Nixon lost the election to John F. Kennedy by 0.2% of the vote, 49.7% to 49.5%. In an election that close, every mistake matters. A mistake like not getting the makeup right was the kind of thing that infuriated Roger Ailes. Now, 7 years later, Ailes was meeting Nixon for the first time in the makeup room of the Mike Douglas show. At age 26, Ailes looked like an assistant, but he was the boss, the executive producer of the show. And Nixon was once again a presidential candidate in what was beginning to look like a crowded field covering the 1968 Republican nomination. Ailes wanted Nixon to be president, and he knew the most powerful force blocking Nixon's path to the White House was television. To win the White House in the 1960s, you had to understand and respect the power of television. Ailes also knew that one of Nixon's potential rivals for the Republican nomination understood everything about television, Ronald Reagan, the former film and TV actor. Ailes wondered what Nixon had learned about TV since the makeup disaster of the 1960 campaign. Sitting in the makeup chair, Nixon offhandedly mentioned to Ailes how silly it felt to try to reach voters by appearing on an afternoon talk show like this one instead of a news show like Meet the Press. The Mike Douglas show is targeted at housewives and usually populated by B-list showbiz celebrities. In response, Ailes instantly rattled off a list of every bad move Nixon had ever made on TV, and it was a long list. Ailes was a teenager when he'd seen some of these things. This was not the way people talked to former Vice President Richard Milhous Nixon. There was none of the deference Nixon had become accustomed to over the decades, and Nixon loved it. Nixon made Ailes an offer he couldn't refuse. Instead of trying to make Mike Douglas America's biggest afternoon TV star, make Richard Nixon America's next president. With Ailes on the media team, the Nixon campaign was ready to make the move from being the worst TV campaign to the best. "We're going to build this whole campaign around television," Nixon told his media team. "You boys just tell me what to do and I'll do it." Roger Ailes' career in Republican politics, which included every day he ran Fox News, turned out to be longer than Richard Nixon's. Ailes became more influential in Republican politics than Nixon ever was. We have reason to wonder who would be president today if Richard Nixon had not provoked Roger Ailes in the Mike Douglas show makeup room. Such are the seeds that were planted in American politics in the 1968 presidential campaign. Run, Bobby, Run is the subhead for the next part of this. Bobby was a natural on television. In 1967, he was the only potential presidential candidate who could charm a TV audience just by being himself. All he needed was his smile. Bobby was the Elvis of American politics, the only politician who didn't need a last name to identify him. But his last name was everything. It was Bobby Kennedy's last name that made every potential candidate fear him. As the field of candidates began to take shape in 1967, every campaign calculation depended on Bobby, even when he showed no signs of wanting to run, even when he told people he wasn't going to run. President Lyndon Baines Johnson feared Bobby to the point of obsession. Johnson thought Bobby was the only one who could do the unthinkable, challenge the incumbent president's grip on the Democratic nomination. Johnson was sure that Bobby was the only Democrat who might dare run against him. He was wrong. Nixon feared Bobby too, as did every Republican planning a campaign. Nixon knew exactly what to fear. He had lost to a Kennedy before. Losing to a Kennedy meant losing to the Kennedy political machine, and it meant losing it to the Kennedy style. A political machine can be beaten by a better political machine, though Nixon had never seen a better political machine than the Kennedys. Kennedy's style was something else. Nixon knew there was nothing Ailes could do for his image that could compete with Kennedy's style. Nixon couldn't change his sharply receding hairline. At 54, he was too old to do anything but tamp down his short, dark hair as flat as possible on his head. Bobby's hair had grown longer every year of the 1960s. Now at 42, he had the shaggiest hair in the United States Senate. His little brother Ted was the only other senator with a full head of hair. Bobby's hair was beginning to grow over his ears, rock musician length for the Senate then. And everywhere Bobby spoke outside the Senate chamber, he was treated like a rock star. That's what Nixon and Johnson feared most about Bobby, the way the crowds responded to him. They'd never seen anything like it in politics. Nixon and Johnson were both old enough to remember the first time anyone saw fans screaming and swooning for Frank Sinatra in the 1940s, before, during, and after every song Sinatra sang. America saw an even more intense version of that fan reaction when the Beatles landed in the United States in 1964. And now Nixon and Johnson saw a version of it happening to Bobby. Everywhere Bobby went, crowds worked themselves into frenzies. When he spoke, he didn't sound like any senator they'd heard before. His voice wasn't stiff and self-conscious. The book Playing with Fire by Lawrence O'Donnell.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Donald Trump, the breaking news right now, which is pretty startling, is that Donald Trump's personal valet, now this is a guy who works for the Navy, has tested positive. You know, this is the guy who comes into the presidential suite every morning and lays out the president's clothes and helps him get dressed and brings him his hamburgers from McDonald's. And, make sure that his TV is adjusted to Fox News and the volume is the way he likes it, and brings him bonbons and caramel corn when he's demanding it as he's sitting there watching Fox News. Brings him, maybe even holds for him his cell phone while he types out his little tweets. Or maybe this is the guy that Trump dictates them to if they're done on a laptop or something like that. But anyhow, he's testing positive for COVID. And I'll just leave that right there. Meanwhile, the Dr. Deborah Birx, the scarf lady, she and Anthony Fauci have been the two more or less reliable voices of reason. She has a tendency to fall into the, suck up to Trump rhetoric more frequently than Fauci. But nonetheless, I mean, they're both reasonable, credible scientists, or at least they were credible before they were contaminated by their association with Donald Trump. But I think that they're both actually trying to do the right thing. And she asked the CDC to compile a list of guidelines that could be used by hospitals, that could be used by restaurants, that could be used by hair salons, that could be used by big box stores, just right across the board, every kind of business. It's 17 pages long. that says, here are the things that you have to do if you want to reopen. Just very straightforward stuff. With restaurants, for example, you don't no longer have buffets, because then, with a buffet, I come along and pick up the tongs and take some cherry tomatoes and put them on my salad. I set the tongs down, which are now contaminated with my COVID if I had it. And then you come along behind me and pick up the tongs, and now you've got COVID all over your hands, right? So do away with salad bars and all that kind of stuff. Just as a for example. Well, even that provision is gone. In fact, the whole thing is gone. It's been deep-sixed. It was supposed to be published last Friday, and the White House has basically been sitting on this saying, nah, not going to happen. The Associated Press here saying it's never going to see the light of day. The AP said that angry scientists were told the guidance would never see the light of day. That was the phrase that was out of the White House, although it has been leaked. And why? Why don't they want this guidance? Because it's a slippery slope. Once you start regulating, this is where the libertarianism of Charles Koch and his other right-wing buddies comes in. These guys literally believe that the less government you have, the freer society is and the better things work. Now, they probably wouldn't say that about police. And police are doing essentially the same thing that government does, regulating behavior. But anyhow, that's what they believe. And so obviously, if you want the government to stop regulating big oil refineries and let them be more profitable and pump more poison into the air, then you draw a line in the sand. No more regulation. And this is just a form of regulation in their mind. And the White House is going along with it, and the Republican Party is going along with this. A source told CNN at CDC, this is somebody at CDC, quote, "We are getting used to dealing with a White House that asks for things and then chaos ensues." And this person went on to say, "I see the new normal being what it was 3 months." I'm sorry, this is President Trump. Trump says, "I want to see the new normal being what it was 3 months ago. I think we want to go back to where it was. I want to go back to where it was. That's what we're going to be. That's where we're going to be." This is Trump. Okay, Donald. Actually, Trump has succeeded in some regards in taking us back to 3 months ago. He's done it in large part by massive testing. They've got these 15-minute tests over at the White House. Every person who comes into the White House gets tested every morning when they show up. Trump and Pence get tested. When Trump went to that Honeywell plant, the reason that he and the executives were able to sit around and talk to each other without masks is that every single one of them was tested. Anyone who got within 50 feet of the president was tested. Anyone who knew someone who was going to get within 50 feet of the president was tested. They've got all kinds of test kits over at the White House. They offered to test the Senate, right? And Pelosi and McConnell said, and I think this was a mistake, frankly, but they said, no, those should go to hospitals. Well, they're not going to go to hospitals. Trump is going to use them to test his buddies when they come over to have hamburgers with him in the afternoon and watch Fox News. Now, if these tests were widely available, I'm sitting here all alone in my house, or, Louise is downstairs. I'm upstairs in an old bedroom converted into an office, in my office. And this is, it's the two of us. And we very much miss our kids and our grandkids. And in particular, we've got a 2-year-old grandson, and Louise is like going nuts. She wants to hang out with him. She wants to hold him. She wants to read to him. He's constantly asking for her, so she's doing FaceTime conversations with him every day. If we had test kits, my daughter and her wife and their son could all be tested. Louise and I could be tested, and if all 5 of us are negative, we could get together and have a party. We could go to a restaurant where they test the entire staff every day if we had test kits like the White House has. We could go to a retail store where, they test people at the door. They tested all their employees, and they require you to test yourself before you come. And bring your little test kit showing the purple stain, showing that you're clear, or whatever it may be. If we had test kits, we could be as free and open as the White House is. But no, the White House says you can't have those test kits and you have to open back up. I mean, this is just crazy. This is, what they're calling for is to kill grandma. And on top of that, I mean, over the years, it's been well documented that the Trump crime family has just run a huge variety of frauds and grifts. I mean, the New York Times documented how Donald and his sister made off with hundreds of millions of dollars from their father's estate, and you and I got stuck with the bill. They scammed the IRS. Numerous stories about, Kushner's sisters selling green cards to Chinese people if they bought Kushner or Trump properties. Trump's daughter, Ivanka, and his sons lying to potential investors in New York City, say, oh, yeah, this is all sold out. You're going to get the lottery. These guys are hustlers. They are grifters. So what do? They set up a task force to get protective equipment and vaccines and personal protective equipment and tests, put grifter Jared Kushner in charge of this thing, and he packs it with young interns from hedge funds. In other words, grifters in waiting, grifters in training. And now this grift has expanded into this dangerous and potentially deadly anti-lockdown movement being funded by authoritarian right-wing billionaires like Betsy DeVos. I mean, they're running a grift to make money is, kind of an old thing. Even running a grift to acquire political power, like Trump did to become president. Nothing new. But running a grift where you empower and turn loose on America a group of well-armed wannabe Nazis, that carries a real, deep, and lasting threat of damage to both our society and our form of government. I mean, many of these people are calling for a boogaloo, their new race-based civil war. We saw this movie back in the 1860s, and it's not one we want to repeat. Trump's very fine people need to be marginalized, not used to promote this grift. They need to be pitied, condemned, and socially ostracized for the traitors and pathetic America haters that they are. I don't think this is going to end in November. I think this is going to be lasting damage. Do you think so?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I think it's going to take at least a decade for this country to recover from Trump. What do you think? And welcome back. Let me just see who we've got on the line here. Lisa in Seattle. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. I wanted to see if there was something on your radar that just came onto my radar. It's a documentary coming out called Plandemic, and it was put together by, she's basically an anti-vaxxer, Dr. Judy Milkovitz. I guess what concerns me is I'm an RN, and I hear a lot of people saying that herd immunity is the way to go and are against the lockdown. And I kind of looked deeper into some of these people that were promoting this documentary. And it's kind of scary. They're almost backdoor pro-Trump people, in my humble opinion. So
is the essence of the documentary that it's sort of like the argument that the anti-vaxxers make with measles, mumps, and chickenpox, mm-hmm. that these diseases aren't so bad, and if you get it as a kid, you get lifelong immunity, and that's better than getting a vaccine where it's only 10-year immunity. Yeah. And so we should just throw out the vaccines and go back to the 1950s. Is that what they're arguing?
Correct.
And they're saying basically yes, COVID is the same thing?
Yeah, and she used to work with Dr. Fauci, so she's very much saying that basically this was a man-made virus, but that
that's not true.
They're doing it to try to I know, but they're doing it to try to control the masses. It's really scary how many conspiracies are out there. But this documentary is about to come out, and she has a connection with Dr. Fauci. And I just wanted to put that on your radar to look into.
Yeah, I will. Okay. Lisa, thank you. Not good news, but I will check it out. I will absolutely check it out. Yeah. I appreciate the call.
All right,
thank you. Yeah, oh, pardon me. Robbie in Portland. Hey, Robbie, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Hey, actually, I wanted to say that thing. You all should check that out. That is a wonderful documentary. Part 2 is going to be coming out soon.
What are you talking about?
It's about the Plandemic documentary that the last caller was just
the one that the
about.
woman was just talking about. You like it.
And I think that you should watch it before you start criticizing it. And before you hang up on me with facts that you don't want to talk about, you're talking to Tom.
Robbie, I think you just hung up on yourself. You just faded out.
Pence and Donald, can you hear me?
I couldn't there for about 4 seconds, so start over again.
Oh, okay. I'm going to run this by you. What do you think about Donald Trump and Mike Pence having actually had a vaccine? Did you hear about that hot mic that was caught inside the White House when those two people were talking about how they had already had vaccines?
I have not, and
you should check that out. You should check. Hey, Tom, have I ever lied to you?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Robbie, but it may well be that somebody said that, but a vaccine, before you can give a vaccine to people, you need to give it to like test subjects and watch them for at least a year, to make sure that they don't get like the Guillain-Barré syndrome that people got from the what was it, the swine flu vaccine way back in the day?
Right. Guess who I'm, and this is speculation. I'll give you that. This is just a theory. But what's his face? Boris Johnson. I believe he thought he had a vaccine, but they are not. The reason the public does not have a vaccine is because they are waiting for the pharmaceutical companies to get the patent on it before they can deliver it. So I believe Mike Pence and Donald Trump already have it. You should listen to that hot mic of these two people inside the White House saying that they had the vaccine. Pandemic, you all should check it out.
Robbie.
That's exactly what's
I'll Google it.
Right?
I will during the break at the bottom of the hour. Thanks. And strange times. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So every week we do a special video for supporters of our program. It's available over at thomhartmann.com. And, it's a private video. And this week I'm talking about the relationship between Donald Trump and Fox News. Trump's recent liberate these states with Democratic governors tweets, which seem to be actually calling for like armed revolt or asking, his crazy followers to let's send some pipe bombs or something like one already has to Democrats. He did that 2 minutes after watching a Fox News segment basically saying the same thing. Fox News is programming the brain of the president, and their programming was, basically developed by Roger Ailes to infuriate people. This outrage as a way of holding people so that they can sell advertising. And it's doing harm to our republic. You can check the whole thing out, the whole new video, over at thomhartmann.com.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. By the way, just an FYI, in the second hour of our program, Professor Richard Wolff is going to be here. I learned a couple of days ago and shared it with you that Fed Chair Jerome Powell, Jay Powell, it turns out he's not actually an economist. He's a bankster and a vulture fund guy, and he's running our Fed, and so is the number two guy. And so I want to talk to Richard Wolff about what does that mean? I mean, the Fed is going in directions that, you might think a bank would like, but what about the rest of us? And in our third hour, we have a scientist, Professor Gard, Otis, who's going to drop by and talk about the murder hornets and what all that means. And, are they coming to a town near you? Are they going to be able to stop this? All kinds of stuff like that. But I wanted to talk, I talked about the giant grift here at the top of the hour. And how, in my opinion, it's going to take America at least a decade to recover from this, just like it took us a decade to recover from the right-wing grift in the 1930s. You had Charles Lindbergh and his America First movement, and you had the Nazi Bund, and you had literally hundreds of thousands of people across the United States during the 1930s protesting against the Roosevelt administration. You had the Klan coming out and demonstrating. You had, against integration and some of the programs that FDR was doing. You had the America First movement, which was Lindbergh saying that, Hitler's not so bad and we shouldn't boycott Germany. We should be doing business with them and everything's good.
There's that spectacular, by the way, HBO piece. If you have an HBO subscription, it's just a 6-part movie. It's like a movie in 6 parts, based on a Philip Roth novel. And it's called The Plot Against America. And it's about what would have happened if in 1940, in the election of 1940, Charles Lindbergh had been elected instead of Franklin Roosevelt. And it is breathtaking. It is so good. But anyhow, so I was talking about the grift and how long it's going to take us to recover from the damage of these grifters and their fellow traveler billionaires and neo-Nazis. Just check out, I mean, the cast of characters, the cast of characters of these grifters is just breathtaking. You got people like Roger Marshall. He's a Republican from Kansas. He's a member of the Republican Doctors Caucus. He says, just like Jesus, the poor will always be with us. There's a group of people who just don't want health care, and they're not going to take care of themselves. Well, maybe, and I would call that group schizophrenics, profoundly mentally incapacitated people, who are in institutions or should be if it's appropriate for them. But that's not who he's talking about. He's talking about the poor and the homeless. He says morally, spiritually, socially, the poor, the homeless, they just don't want health care. The Medicaid population, right? This is the bottom half of working America. The people who earn so little that they don't qualify for Obamacare. So, blue states have expanded Medicaid for them, and a couple of red states have, to give them credit. Most of them have not. The Medicaid population, he says, which is on a free credit card as a group, do probably the least preventative medicine in taking care of themselves and eating healthy and exercising. So there's a group of people that even with unlimited access to health care, in other words, anybody can see the ER, right, are only going to use the emergency room when their arm is chopped off or when they have pneumonia so bad they have to go to the ER. Right? This is how these people think. These white, wealthy members of the Republican Party, they just figure, poor people are just like inherently stupid or don't want health care or whatever. I mean, it's crazy. Now, on top of this, we find out that the woman who a month or so ago accused Anthony Fauci of sexual assault, remember this? Turns out it was 2 right-wing provocateurs, Jacob Wall and Jack Berman. She's now saying they paid her. She says, the reality is I've known Jacob since 2018, and he charmed me into taking money to do this. This is Diana Andrade, the woman who said this. They also had me do something like this back in January. And she decided to abandon her claims and try to record incriminating evidence against this pair after he asked her to find another woman to accuse Fauci. He said, let me tell you something, Diana. She's got a 9-minute tape of this. This is the guy paying her to accuse Fauci of sexual assault. This guy shut the country down. He put 40 million people out of work. In a situation like that, you have to make up whatever you have to make up to stop that train. And that's the way life works, okay? That's the way it goes. Mother Nature has to clean the barn every so often. How real is it? Who knows? So what if 1% of the population goes? So what if you lose 400,000 people, 200,000 elderly? The other 200,000 are at the bottom of society. He's talking about poor and black people here. You got to clean the barn. If it's real, it's a positive thing, for God's sake. What could go wrong, Diana? You did a good job. You got paid. What's the problem? What seems to be the issue? You're freaking out. You texted me late at night. What's the issue here? Right. This guy's apparently a lawyer. And then the Postal Service has picked a millionaire Trump donor to run the post office. Right, he's one of Trump's top donors. He's one of the Republican Party's top donors. His name is Gerald Brennan. Oh, I'm sorry, Brennan was the last Postmaster General. His name is Louis DeJoy. And he's an accomplished business executive in North Carolina. Are we ready to see the post office go away?
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I haven't even started to get to some of the other Republican grifters around the country. I'll recap that on the other side of this break and then pick up your phone calls. It's May 7th.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskenson Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
Dr. J. Family-Eddy is here on how the number of people harmed by floods will double worldwide by 2030. In Geeky Science, don't miss the 7 things that happen when you stop eating meat or eat less meat during this pandemic. And our fact of the week is about plummeting wildlife and extinctions. Check out The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This disease really kicks your ass. I mean, there are reports all over. Now we've got, some 60 kids in New York who are, they don't have the respiratory symptoms. Instead, they're coming down with blood clotting and all sorts of weird stuff going on with these children. A brand new syndrome, right? Meanwhile, here in Oregon, the first person to test positive for the coronavirus, he was a school custodian. He's 46 years old, Hector Calderon. He works at the Forest Hills Elementary School in Lake Oswego, which is literally right down the road from where one of my kids and their kids lives. He had symptoms on February 19th. He was the second patient in the country known to have gotten this through community spread, meaning it was floating around in the Lake Oswego, southern Portland area at the time. That was February 28th. He had his first symptoms on February 19th. I think way back to February 19th. I mean, we were just, I was still traveling on my book tour, I believe, on February 19th. And he was also one of the first people to be treated with remdesivir, the antiviral that is all the rage right now. But he was on a ventilator for like a month, and he got out of the hospital yesterday. His symptoms started February 19th, and by March 19th, he was unconscious and on a ventilator, and then April 19th, still in the hospital, and here we are, May 7th, he's finally out of the hospital, but he still requires oxygen just to get around. He's so weakened and so whacked by this. And when you look at the U.S. numbers, we have in the neighborhood of 1.3 million cases in the United States, known cases of this virus. We have 205,000 people who've recovered. Because it takes 30, 60 days. I mean, it's a month or two that you're down. This disease is it just absolutely will kick your ass, and you need to be very, very careful about this thing. Meanwhile, a woman, back to the grifters and the very fine people, Donald Trump's very fine people. In Oklahoma City, a woman walked into a McDonald's, wanted to buy a burger and sit down and eat it. The guy said, "Sorry, you got to take it with you. You can't eat here in our restaurant because, it's been closed." She pulls out a gun. This from KFOR News in Oklahoma City. One employee was hit in the arm, second was hit with shrapnel in the neck and shoulder, and a third employee was hit with shrapnel in the side. 2 of those employees are 16 years old. They're all taken to the hospital. She was upset because she couldn't eat in the dining room. I'm telling you, there's like, it might be just one of those crazy people who's constantly upset and always involved in road rage incidents and things, and finally she popped in a way that she got arrested. Or it could be, and this is, I was talking about this day before yesterday about, this kind of deep-seated anxieties that manifests itself as rage that, is bubbling up to the surface from time to time, did with me the day that this guy with his dogs was chasing our geese and all this kind of stuff. So, anyway. Other grifters now in Arizona. Governor Doug Ducey has assured us that reopening the state, his decision to reopen the state, is not based on politics. No wishful thinking. We're going to do this based on data. Well, the supplier of data is a scientist by the name of Tim Lant. He's an epidemiologist at the Arizona State University. And Lant and his team were notified that, quote, their services are no longer needed, and that not only that, they'll be cut off from access to state data they need to continue their modeling, end quote. The guy reporting about this for the Arizona Republic said about Ducey, he's got a president up for re-election who desperately wants to reopen the country, a party that's leaning on him to reopen the state, and a team of university scientists who are cautioning him to go slow. Guess which one landed in the ditch this week? Meanwhile, the grifters around Donald Trump are doing just fine. I get a fundraiser almost every day from the Trump campaign. There's got to be a whole bunch of old, folks out there who are watching Fox News and are barely hanging on, but they've got some good retirement money who have given him $10, $20, $50, $100,000, way beyond the limit. It's got to be a pile of them. Because Brad Parscale, the guy who's running his campaign, he's raked in $38.9 million. Garrett Lansing, who started out as a staffer for the RNC, he's taken in $1.7 million. This from Huffington Post. The headline, win or lose, Trump's top campaign aides are raking in the cash. Katie Walsh, who was a White House aide for Donald Trump and a RNC chief of staff, she's gotten $877,000. Richard Walters, 30 years old, the current chief of staff for the RNC, he makes $244,000 a year. But last year, he was paid an additional $135,000. And since the Trump presidency began, this 30-year-old has taken a total of $755,000. Parscale, the guy who's running Trump's campaign, has just bought a $2.4 million waterfront house in Fort Lauderdale, a pair of $1 million condos, a brand new $400,000 boat, and another $500,000 in luxury cars, including a Ferrari. Republican consultant Stuart Stevens says, this thing has been a large criminal enterprise, dishing out furs to mob bosses, girlfriends, and wives. Yeah, it appears that way. So, anyway, how long do you think this is going to last, and how is this all going to play out? Brandon in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. Hey, Brandon, it says you're a Trump supporter. You're in the front line. What are your thoughts on this? Brandon, you are on the air. Brandon is not on the air. Brandon, you got to listen to your phone. Brandon's on line 4. You're going to check him out, Joyce. Denise in Calumet, Michigan. Hey, Denise, what's on your mind?
Well, I think this is going to last for a long time. But a friend of mine the other day told me that she thinks that Trump should be signing the death certificates instead of the checks that he didn't want to give people anyway. And I agreed.
Oh, my.
The only thing is that were I to die, my ashes would be rolling around like jelly beans if I knew he had anything to do with signing anything of mine.
Yeah, there is that problem.
I think this is going to go on for a long, long time. This country is so divided. People that love each other are in absolutely realms of hate right now, and it's just ridiculous, even in a small town.
Yeah, that's, what do you mean, Denise? Give me an example.
Well, we live in a red area, and people up here think that we don't, that it's a hoax. They believe Trump. They're not wearing masks. They're not, very few people are taking this seriously. It's just like We only have 2 cases, but they don't think it's coming. They're crazy.
Well, he really and truly believes, and he's actually said this out loud, that he won't get reelected if the economy doesn't get back to normal. What he said yesterday was that he didn't want the economy to get back to CDC normal. He didn't want restaurants to have to operate at 50% capacity, or theaters or airlines, keep middle seats open. He doesn't want any of that stuff to happen because it will reduce the profitability. And in some cases, for a lot of restaurants, it'll reduce the viability. I mean, it'll literally force them out of business at current prices. So they would have to, and I'm guessing what we're going to see is, safe restaurants, the restaurants with social distancing and all that kind of stuff, and maybe once we've got test kits, will be raising their prices, and people will pay to go out, and it's going to become a luxury thing. But, so there's going to be changes in this all. But Trump says he doesn't want to see any of those changes. He wants to see everything the way it was, knowing, he's had literally the best scientists in the world tell him, if we did that, you're going to have a couple million, several million dead Americans, and you're going to have tens of millions of wounded Americans, people who got the COVID, got really, really sick, survived it, and now for the rest of their lives, they're going to have COPD, or they're going to have kidney damage, or they're going to have liver disease. You just shaved 10, 20 years off their lives. It's literally millions of American lives will be like that. But Donald Trump is willing to pay that price to get the economy open. The problem, I think, that he's going to confront in this, Denise, and probably the guy who tried to call in a little earlier saying that Trump was doing a great job, the problem they're going to confront is that people aren't going to play his game. The entire city of Portland could open tomorrow, and I would be surprised if 10% of the population went out and made use of that.
Right. And I think even those people, those idiots in Michigan holding the Confederate flags and with their long guns, a lot of them had masks on. So tell me they don't believe something's going on. It's just... Well, it's
a lot of those people wore masks before, before there was any COVID. They just didn't want to be identified because they were ashamed of their racism or embarrassed, or, they didn't want mommy to see what they were up to. So, they're basically cowards, these people. That's why they're carrying guns. They're frightened. They're cowards. So, we need to have some compassion for them, I suppose.
That lawyer that you talked about earlier that said something about Jesus and the poor, well, I think he needs to...
That wasn't a lawyer, that was a legislator.
Okay, a legislator. He needs to read Psalm 73. And that would open his eyes. Psalm 73 talks about all these wicked people and what they're doing to oppress the poor.
Oh, interesting. I'll have to check that out. It's been a long time since I've read Psalm 73. Thank you, Denise. Great to hear from you, and have a marvelous day. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Well, our Trump defender dropped off the line before Joyce could get to him. And now the lines are full. That's unfortunate. We'll be right back. When these rare Trump defenders get up enough courage to call in and actually stay on the line long enough to put on, Louise used to answer the phone, and she would tell me stories about how they call up and yell and scream obscenities at her and stuff like that. And she'd say, "Well, you want to go on the air? If you can avoid swearing." And they go, no, I don't want to do that. And literally 9 out of 10 of them, they just want to yell at the call screener. And then the rare one that you do get on, I feel like a cat playing with a mouse when I get these on. It's great fun. So, if you're a Trump defender, feel free to call in, 202-808-9925. All the lines are busy right now, but, sometimes if you can catch it, when I hang up on somebody, there's a little window there of a few seconds before the phone starts ringing. You might be able to get in. Les in Tacoma. Hey, Les, thanks. What's on your mind today?
What's on my mind today? It's been on my mind for many generations in my family, and capitalism is the financing of the mental illness of white supremacy. And during this wild worldwide... Go ahead.
No, I just said amen, at least the way that it's constructed right now in the United States. Absolutely.
Yeah, and at this time, white folks are welcome to join in the battle for survival of those, negatively being affected by the system of greedy capitalists. Working to finance the mental illness of white supremacy. You talk about the grifting. Yeah. Well, we have the perfect example of those grifters in the White House and involved in our governance. And it's not just the Republican Party. Democrats are just as equally guilty through generations.
They're nowhere
of
near
gained.
equally guilty, Les. You've got half the Democratic Party are members of the Congressional
that's-
Progressive Caucus. They're not taking corporate money. They're advocating good positions. Yes, there are some Democrats. In fact, one of them in Illinois just got voted out of office in the primary. But there are some corrupt Democrats.
That's your
I'll give you
opinion.
that, but
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, it's not just my opinion,
That's
unless
your
it's
opinion.
backed by actual facts. Let me give you one fact to start out. About
hold on a
half
sec. Hey,
of
hey,
all
hey,
the
hey,
Democrats in Congress. Les, this isn't Fox News. Stop talking for a minute, and I'll let you talk when I'm done. About half the Democrats in Congress at the federal level are members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They take progressive positions. There is no Republican, not one Republican.
That does what?
Who takes any kind of progressive positions. You're saying all the Democrats are as corrupt as the Republicans. I'm calling bull on that.
See, hold on a second. See, you wouldn't let me finish my point. My point is that this outside of our governance and the Republican and Democratic parties, there's a thing called wealth. Wealth has been established through generations of ill-gotten. It started with slavery. It's the white male land ownership that the Constitution represents. And that's more than just Republicans and Democrats. It is white supremacy, which is
I've already agreed with you on that.
Well, but I didn't get to finish my point, and I've listened to your show for years. I respect your opinions and the facts that you represent. But I'm a black man. We have lived for generations dealing with these situations. We currently have white mobs invading state capitol buildings loaded with weapons and police not doing anything.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Les, and I think that's the ultimate statement of white supremacy and white privilege. I've made that point numerous times. But to attack the Democratic Party, if you want to attack capitalists or people who have some money, fine. But I think that we need to change the rules of capitalism to make it work for everyone. Les, I got to run, but thank you for the call. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Karen in Port Huron, Michigan. Hey, Karen, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I had Guillain-Barré. That's how you pronounce it. I had that in 2014.
That was the disease that was the result of a badly designed vaccine, right?
Well, no, it's been around for years. But in the 70s, with that flu vaccine, they realized there was a lot more cases of Guillain-Barré. And they traced it back to people getting the flu shot.
Right. That
now,
was when Jerry
had
Ford was president, wasn't it?
Oh, maybe. But when I had it, I don't really know what I got it from. But anyways, what happens is your immune system attacks your peripheral nerves.
Mm-hmm. Peripheral
and
nerves.
At first, you start feeling like tingling, and then it gets, attacks it more and more. You get to the point where you're like, I was like pretty much paralyzed. I could lift my arms just a little bit. And
did you go? Did you recover?
Oh yeah, it actually attacked my breathing muscles too.
Huh.
So I couldn't breathe, and I had to be intubated for that.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa. So
I actually recovered pretty quick. I got to walk again pretty fast. Compared to most people. Well, people take more months.
That's good, but I mean, this is a disease that in the 70s people were getting from taking a poorly designed vaccine, and that's why you don't want to rush a vaccine out. Karen, thank you for sharing your story with us. That's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. Joel in Portland. Hey, Joel, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Hey, Tom. I just wanted to let everybody know that yesterday I came upon some set of numbers that have been misrepresented. I think somewhere out there, it came up on a text thread with some friends. there's a discrepancy in the CDC numbers of total deaths in the U.S. I had sent a text out that said, hey, 70,000 people have died. And someone sent back a screenshot that showed the CDC numbers as 45,000. They said, oh, hey, they've actually revised that number. A quick search of that website showed that data set is actually the medically coded deaths. So these are where there's a name and a medical history connected to them. So, and there's of course an admission on there that they're about 1 to 2 weeks behind. So if you're seeing someone saying on Facebook or wherever you're getting that sort of info from that the 70,000 number is false and it's actually 45,000, that's where they're getting that number from. So just
and that's one of the places that they're doing it. And expect to see, by the way, Donald Trump is going to join this chorus any day now. But this has been all over Fox News now for 4 days. It's all over right-wing hate radio. And what they're saying is that the numbers are padded. In fact, I had a couple of people tweeting this at me yesterday. And this is bot whatever it's called. Hang on just a second. It's the bot Sentinel. They have discovered that there's a whole bunch of foreign bots that are promoting this idea that the death numbers are padded. It's really not as bad. Don't worry. Get out there. Open the economy. Make the billionaires rich again. And the stock market is going up on this news. But it's a lie. It's just an absolute lie. And in fact, as the New York Times has documented, state after state that has high levels of COVID also have high levels of deaths, unexplained deaths, unattributed deaths, people dying in their homes from strokes and heart attacks that were originally listed as strokes and heart attacks. But why is it that all of a sudden the number of strokes and heart attacks has exploded only in those areas that are also having COVID infections? It's not anxiety. It is COVID showing up as a stroke, COVID showing up as a heart attack. It doesn't always show up as pneumonia. And now in kids, we're seeing it show up as, red eyes and sores on their toes and extreme lethargy, and we don't know what kind of damage it's doing to these children's nervous systems, but it appears that it's doing that. Get ready, Joel, because this is going to be the next big battle. You've got Florida covering up their numbers, refusing to release their death numbers, so you can't compile anything. I'm guessing that more red states will follow in Florida's lead. Pretty soon it's going to get harder and harder to get access to those numbers. Trump has basically shut down the CDC. We're not going to hear from Fauci and Birx again in any meaningful way. He is saying he wants the economy back the way it used to be by November so he can get reelected, period, full stop. And everybody who is afraid of him and everybody who wants his love and attention is having to salute that particular flag. And that's why you've got Doug Ducey in Arizona, Mr. Goofball, just kind of going along with it. And you got Brian Kemp down in Georgia, the guy who stole the election from Stacey Abrams, going along with it. And you got Ron DeSantis, covering up the deaths of people in Florida, refusing to say where the nursing homes are. I mean, it just goes on and on. These guys are grifters, and their latest grift involves the death of 70, 80, 100,000 Americans. And
hey, Tom, one more thing. I know I'm going to have to go here pretty soon, but I want to say that all those people are out there. They're doing all that, and you have everyone out there who's listening has contacts among their friends, and they're seeing this stuff being put out there. Maybe people aren't buying it all the way, but they're putting it out there. It's actually really simple to refute this stuff. All you have to do is look past the headline and do some simple searches of the author's name, the filmmaker's names, any of this stuff, and you can come back to your friends with actual data, and you can change their minds.
Well, hopefully. The problem isn't so much our friends, because we have access to them and we can help change their minds.
But that's where
the problem is this whole right-wing media machine that's reaching people that you don't know, and it's reaching into large, places where there are a large pocket of people with no progressives, no liberals, no Democrats in the area, into the red states. I mean, basically what they're doing with false information and lies is they're tearing America apart. I predict within a week, you're going to hear right-wing hate mongers on right-wing hate radio and on Fox News saying that when you see somebody out with a mask on, you know that person's a liberal, which is like, in other words, that person is a target for your rage and your anger and for you to spit on and for you to harass. And it's already starting to happen, Joel, and it's going to get a whole lot worse. Joel, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. We're hitting the top of the hour. Richard Wolff is up next.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich, while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen, and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock The dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001 inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for-now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskensen Institute and Stephen Tellez of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, author of numerous books, his latest Understanding Socialism, and his other website is rdwolff.com. You can tweet him at profwolff with 2 Fs. Professor Wolff, welcome back. I was absolutely astonished to see this piece over at Pam and Russ Martin's site. They talk about economics a lot. Sometimes they get into some weird right-wing stuff, but this seemed pretty straight up. Most Americans, they write, likely assume that Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, is an economist, like the prior chairs of the Fed over the past 40 years. But he's not. Powell is a former investment banker at the Wall Street firm Dillon Reed, former partner at the controversial private equity and leveraged buyout firm, the Carlyle Group, which has spent over $1 billion just in the past 10 years lobbying the federal government for tax breaks and loopholes and things. A former lawyer at Davis Polk, this big law firm that advised the government and the Treasury in 2008 on the Wall Street bailout. And the vice chair for supervision at the Fed, the guy who is in charge of oversight, who works under Powell, his name is Randall Quarles. and he's in charge of supervising the largest and most dangerous Wall Street bank and holding companies in the U.S. He also worked at Davis Polk and the Carlyle Group. What the hell is going on in the Fed, Mr. Wolff, Professor Wolff?
Well, I think what you're seeing is throwing away the veneer. It wasn't very thick to begin with. The veneer that the Federal Reserve is either independent of the rest of the government or independent of the big banks that it does most of its business with. Other governments have thought it was necessary, as you say, to have professors of economics like Ben Bernanke or Janet Yellen in that position. They don't bother with the veneer anymore. It's a bit of a hallmark, I think, of Mr. Trump. You put the fox in to guard the hen house, and you don't disguise the fox as though he were anything other than a fox. And this is Powell, Quarles, people like that have spent their entire lives working in the industry they are now supposed to police. It's ridiculous. The mere appearance of conflict of interest, if you took it seriously, would have meant such names could not have been considered. But we're now supposed to believe that because they, quote unquote, know the business, they're the right people to police the business. It is crazy, but it's just one more step in a government becoming lock, stock, and barrel, one with the people who sit at the top of the economic pyramid.
So, we've in previous conversations, Professor Wolff, you and I have talked about how the Fed is doing things that may go well beyond its charter. Beyond its mandate, but beyond its charter itself, beyond what it's legally authorized to do. He has stated that he's willing to buy equities. I'm pretty sure that's not in his charter, and I'm surprised, frankly, that they've been able to buy government or buy corporate bonds. I thought that government bonds was the limit of their powers. And do you think that this let's say questionable, because I can't assert that it's illegal, behavior by the Fed, which has served to prop up the biggest corporations in America and actually to enrich them now? I mean, the Fed has passed out $10 trillion, or $6 trillion, excuse me, in loans to giant corporations by buying their bonds, from Ford to, on the list goes. Is it possible that the reason why the Fed is doing this, arguably for the first time in its history, I suppose after 2009 there was a little bit of this under Janet Yellen, but is it possible that it's doing this because of the influence of people like Mr. Powell, former banksters, major, multimillionaire banksters, getting inside the Fed and influencing its policies, other members of the Fed Board of Governors, number one. And number two, is this going to lead to a disaster? I mean, it reminds me of the massive deregulation in 1927, 1928, under the two successive Republican administrations, when Hoover was, and going back to Harding, frankly, refusing to regulate the banks and the brokerage houses and the whole lending industry that was, helping stockbrokers buy things on margin. Are we seeing like a recap or a reboot of that same thing?
I think so. I think what you're seeing, I would put it slightly differently, but you're basically right. These are people who spent their lifetime manipulating the stock market. They did it as lawyers advising the clients that were doing it. And then when they became parts of entities like the Carlyle Group, then they began doing it themselves. That's who they are. That's where they come from. So, yes, they would be the ones to take the Federal Reserve beyond its traditional business, which is dealing in the government securities and nothing else, and now going to basically prop up corporate America by buying those bonds, and the next step will be to buy the equities. Look, make no mistake, the other reason is also valid. We're in a capitalist system that is in very, very deep doo-doo. This is the third crisis in the 21st century, the dot-com in 2000, the subprime mortgage in 2008, and now the third one, the corona one, the stock market each time taking a major hit, risking a general collapse. In comes the cavalry, i.e. the United States Treasury, and now the Federal Reserve, basically throwing unspeakable amounts of money wherever and however needed. If the Federal Reserve now, with Powell, takes that last step and starts buying securities, and by the way, there's quite a bit of speculation in Wall Street that they did that quietly and off the record back in 2008 and 9. They were so scared. So for all we know, they may have already done it. We don't know. But if they move in that direction, then you will see the government directly propping up the stock market, using printed money to keep the prices of stocks high, and therefore further disconnecting the small number of people who own significant amounts of stock from everybody else. In short, this is the recipe for going even further into the inequality of this society than we already are, with all the destabilizing that comes from that.
It seems to me like what's going on here is that Powell has figured out a way to rig the economy, or at least that portion of the economy that's of interest and value to the investor class, to protect the investor class, while average working Americans and poor working Americans, screw them. You know, do I have that right?
Absolutely. I mean, look, there was no murmur of the trillions of dollars that had now to be spent, giving it to the top and then hoping it trickles down in the classic way. Meanwhile, when it came to how much money you give to the average person, there were big worries about the government's debt. Can't be more than $1,200, which doesn't even pay you a month's rent. They're now squabbling over the food stamps to help the people who are hungry. Absolutely. What they're doing is saying, our system doesn't work. It goes to the brink 3 times in this century, and we're going to bail them out to make them whole. And we're going to stop when we're done with that, because we don't really have to take care of anybody else. They're either politically disorganized or split or passive, and they're not going to do anything. So we're going to take care of ourselves. And Powell and Quarles and people like that, that's who they are. That's what they do.
So what's the end game?
I'm afraid that the end game is when this gets to the point where things are so bad that even this kind of policy doesn't work. When people are so frightened about the underlying weakness that nothing they do will make people buy those stocks or hold them. That's a very, very dangerous risk looming.
Yeah, 1929, Redux. Yep. Professor Richard Wolff, democracywork.info, his latest book, Understanding Socialism. Thank you, Dr. Wolff.
Thank you, Tom.
Good talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Doug watching us on Twitter Live. Hey, Doug in Oregon here in Portland. What's up?
Hi, Tom. Well, I was waiting online, so I'm glad you got to me. I wanted to say happy birthday. I wanted to say thanks for educating me over many years. I also was listening, of course, to the last conversation, and several things came up for me. One is you were talking about the epidemic, how scary it is, how strange it is, how upsetting it is, and I gotta say, I was wondering whether we were talking about Donald Trump or COVID, because they both feel like epidemics to me.
Yeah.
My real question. Sorry.
A pestilence. You know, it's like the question for all of Trump's evangelical supporters. Have you noticed that when you put a guy who constantly lies, who's an adulterer, who robs people, who rips people off, who's a hustler and a con man and a grifter, when you put him in the White House, suddenly we had a plague?
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a question for the evangelicals.
Coincidence?
Back to you, Doug. Sorry.
I think not. My question is, you were talking a few minutes ago about reaching out to other people, reaching out to Republicans and people in red communities, and you mentioned Brad Parscale. And what I've been wondering in the last couple of weeks is, and I want to ask you this, is where is our Brad Parscale? Where is our social media strategy that's clever and engaging? I don't feel like I'm seeing it from Joe Biden and the Democrats, and I'm wondering if you know anything about that.
I don't know the answer to that question, Doug, and it's a question that I should know the answer to. I know that we've got a couple of really good progressive Democratic aligned groups. You've got American Bridge, and if you don't get their newsletter in email, it comes out 2-3 times a week, and it's just amazing. Taking Trump apart, basically. American Bridge, you can find it over on their website. You've got Indivisible, indivisible.org, which is helping coordinate activism all across the United States. But in terms of a digital media superstar, I mean, now Trump has hired this company that's owned by Peter Thiel, I believe, the right-wing billionaire, the one who took down Gawker. And he's got a company that slices and dices personal information or on people all over the country, buys this information and uses it and create. It's like, my understanding of it is the modern version of that company that was out of the UK that Trump used last time. And so they're doing some really, really sophisticated data stuff. I don't know if any Democrats are doing that, and that troubles me.
Well, I sure hope so, because I really want this pestilence to end. And it did dawn on me, and this is just my own projection and speculation. Mike Bloomberg said he would put money and energy into supporting anybody. And boy, I would love to see a big, innovative, engaging campaign spearheaded by him or somebody.
Yeah. Or Tom Steyer. I mean, we've got some people who certainly have the resources to do this kind of thing. Whether they have the will, we'll see. I mean, I'm still waiting for Joe Biden to declare his vice presidential candidate and all that kind of stuff, to roll forward. Now, sometimes candidates don't even do that until the convention. In fact, I think that's probably the norm. But yeah. I think it needs to be done sooner. And then, let's just go into full-blown campaign mode and let's start campaigning. Doug, thank you for the call. It is a troubling concern. I'm not yet to the point of hysteria. I'm concerned. I'm not yet worried. We'll be back. It's 20 minutes past, or we'll be shortly 20 minutes past the hour.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are signed up, for supporters of our program. And it's about how Donald Trump, 16 days after Mr. Khashoggi was murdered by the Saudis in Turkey and his body dismembered and vanished, 16 days after that happened, without notifying Congress and with virtually no mention to anybody, Donald Trump authorized the transfer of top secret nuclear technology to the Saudis. This should be a serious issue. Tim Kaine, the senator from Virginia, is raising hell about it because Khashoggi lived in Virginia. But I think everybody in Congress should be raising hell about this. And when you back this up with this new report out from ProPublica that the Saudis were involved in 9/11, it gets real interesting. So you can check that out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for our basically members-only video.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And this is totally bizarre. This poll just came out. Well, it's not bizarre. In fact, I think it's predictable. But let me toss this to you as well as a question. Why do you think this is? So what is this that I'm talking about? Well, here it is. It's this poll. I'm trying to find if anywhere in this article they're identifying where the poll came from, and I'm not seeing it yet. But in any case, there was a recent poll from one of the big national polling companies that found that when they asked if a coronavirus vaccine is developed, will you take the vaccine? Now, there's always a small baseline of people who have, who are immune compromised, who have severe chronic illnesses, things like lupus or MS, or, there's just a whole variety of diseases where you just don't get vaccines unless you're very, very careful about which vaccine you're getting and when you're getting it, because your immune system is always already screwy, and you don't want to make it even screwier. And there's a baseline of people who are on all these immunosuppressive drugs that basically do to our body what parasites used to do to our body back when we had parasites prior to the 1960s, which was, down-regulate our immune systems so that we don't get things like plaque psoriasis and stuff like that. All of those people would have to be a little wary about a vaccine and talk to their doctor first. So if you asked one of those folks, are you going to do the vaccine when it comes out, they would probably say no, or at least not initially. So you probably have like at least 5% of the population that really shouldn't take the vaccine, or if they do, they should be under doctor's supervision for a few days to see if they get a bad reaction because of their medical condition. So when they asked people, are you going to take the vaccine? Sure enough, there were 7% of Democrats who said, probably not. And I'm guessing that of that 7% of Democrats, 95% of them fall into the categories that I just described. But when they asked Republicans, will you take the vaccine? And there's no difference that I know of in the number of Republicans versus Democrats who have, Crohn's disease and are on immunosuppressive drugs, or, organ transplant, people with immunosuppressive drugs or whatever, who shouldn't take vaccines, or at least shouldn't do them without a careful supervision by a doctor. I don't think there's more Republicans than Democrats in that category. But when they asked Republicans, will you take the vaccine, 1 out of 5 said no. 20%. Well, why would that be? Is it that Republicans tend to be, that among the hardcore evangelicals who believe that the world is only 6,000 years old, that people used to ride dinosaurs, that the world is going to end when there's a war in the Middle East and the temple is re-erected in Jerusalem, and 144,000 Jews will convert to Christianity and be the only survivors, and the rapture is going to happen. Those and science is all nonsense, and you can't trust scientists, you can't believe scientists, because they're trying to tell us to abandon our faith and believe that the world's not 6,000 years old, it's actually 5 billion years old, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got those folks. But a lot of those folks are vaccinating their kids. They may say they don't believe in science, but they don't want their kids to get measles or mumps or whooping cough or rubella, or I guess that's measles, or chicken pox or whatever it may be. I mean, or encephalitis, fill in the blank. So could it be, and so, there's some of those folks, you got some of the anti-vaxxers are probably falling into that category also. But I'm guessing that it has more to do with the fact that the guy with the biggest microphone on the planet, and kudos to the Dartigan community for coming up with this, that the guy with the biggest, over on Daily Codes, with the biggest megaphone on the planet, spent all of January and all of February and the first couple of weeks of March telling us it's a hoax, it's going to go away. You had Fox News personalities like Sean Hannity, Tucker Carlson, it's just like the cold, Laura Ingraham, just this giant megaphone of, there's nothing to see here, there's no there. And they talked about, you only have the infection in the cities where there's a lot of black people. This is, the subtext of their message. And it's only old people and black people and poor people who get sick with this. And you're not any of those things. You're the white middle class. You don't have to worry. It's going to be just fine. Chris Cuomo got through it. Or this idiot in Ohio, Representative Nito Vitale. He said, this is not the entire world. This is the greatest nation on earth, founded on Judeo-Christian principles. In other words, the entire world is, sheltering in place. We shouldn't. He says, wearing masks. He says, one of those principles is that we are all created in the image and likeness of God, and that image is seen the most by our face, and I will not wear a mask. Right? I mean, this is, and some of these people, like I said earlier in the last hour, I'm predicting that within a week or two, you're going to see some of these conservatives asserting to people with masks that they are liberals and they are wimps. And people wearing masks are going to become the object of harassment. or the subjects of harassment.
You're
We'll be
listening
back.
to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925. I'm concerned, shall we say. We'll be back with your calls right after this. This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Separated by the Border, a birth. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Brian Shea and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives, we did food drives, we did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten.
Coming up on the Science Revolution, it's amazing cleaner air during the pandemic is proving the benefits of a decarbonized economy. Dr. J. Family-Eddy is here on how the number of people harmed by floods will double worldwide by 2030. In Geeky Science, don't miss the 7 things that happen when you stop eating meat or eat less meat during this pandemic. And our fact of the week is about plummeting wildlife and extinctions. Check out the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. There's one more thing I wanted to bring to your attention. I retweeted this a couple of days ago. Back in February, a young black man named Ahmaud Arbery, I think I'm pronouncing his name right, was out jogging. And he jogged past the home of a white guy who used to work with the police and his son, who went inside their house, got a shotgun and a pistol, jumped in their pickup truck, and started chasing the jogger. They pulled their truck in front of him and stopped it in the road. He tried to run past the truck. They jumped out of the truck, grabbed him, shot him several times, and watched as he lay and died on the road, and then apparently drove off. Maybe they didn't drive off. I don't know what happened after that. But the video of that and this was like, as I said, this was in February. This was 2 months ago. And the county said, well, it's just a black guy. And, it's 2 white guys who killed him. No big deal. We're not going to do anything. And they didn't do anything. They just, kind of file it in the trash can, right? File it in the circular file. But then the video came out. And to the best of my knowledge, there's still a question of where did this video come from? Was it somebody else who was like, wait a minute, something's going on here? Some other driver? Was it, it couldn't have been police dash cam. They would have intervened. Was it somebody who was friends with the 2 white guys who wanted to capture their moment of shining glory as they murdered a black man? I don't know. But it's out there. And now Georgians, this was in Georgia, in rural Georgia, Georgians are starting to raise some serious hell about this. And it looks like these white guys might be charged with murder. And certainly they deserve to be. When I retweeted it with a comment that said, lynching is alive and well in America. Obviously, it didn't involve a rope, but the sentiment is the same. And he was committing the horrible crime of jogging while black. And immediately, by the way, it came out and said, well, back when he was 9 years old, he shoplifted once, or some BS like this, right? It's like the whole blame the victim stuff. I shoplifted when I was 8 years old. I just didn't get caught. Felt very guilty about it for a long time, but I didn't get caught. Anyway, do it on a dare, right? Sherry in South Hadley, Massachusetts. Hey, Sherry, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I was just noticing in the news that they have put someone in charge of the United States Postal Service that is an ally to Trump. And
yes, a major donor to Trump and to the RNC.
Yeah, but the timing is amazing because everybody is now saying that voting by mail would be the safest way to vote. And now even that could be easily compromised.
Yep. And if the post office goes away, you may have to spend $15 with Federal Express or UPS to have an express letter sent to your, with your mail-in ballot. I mean, this is just, I don't think they're going to go that far, Sherry, but we've danced up to a whole bunch of lines here. And right now, 70 some odd thousand dead Americans. And there's not much controversy around the fact that had Trump shut the country down in February, when he knew what was happening, he couldn't have ignored it at that point. We already had confirmed cases in the United States. The first one was January 19th or 20th, and which was the day, by the way, that South Korea went, totally lock down, test everybody, roll all this stuff out, and they have broken the back of this virus in South Korea. They have reopened that country, or they're largely in ways that are safe. But you can't reopen a country if you don't have widespread testing. As I said earlier, I would love to hang out with my grandchildren, but I can't do that until they're tested and I'm tested on the same day. And, the rapid test should be available to everybody. And Trump has made absolutely no effort at the federal level to do that. Instead, he's told the states they have to do it. And then you get this thing Rachel Maddow was talking about last night, where these scammers in Utah put together their own tests, that seemed to be weirdly only half as effective as regular tests, and then they sold them to a couple of other states, and now the scam is buckling and all this kind of stuff. Yes, Sherry, and the post office, it's not just preventing us from voting by mail this fall. Their real end game, the real reason they're doing this is you've got companies that are lobbying them like crazy. I mean, keep in mind, Carlyle Group, that the Fed chair Jerome Powell used to work for, spent $1 billion over 10 years lobbying in Congress, $100 million a year. $100 million when you've only got, a couple hundred members of Congress will buy you a hell of a lot. And the Carlyle Group, of course, owns a whole huge pile of defense manufacturers, which is the most lucrative business in America, or it was until very recently. Probably still is. So, there's nasty stuff going on. David in Clearwater, Florida. Hey, David, what's on your mind? Thanks for listening to 88.9 FM.
Absolutely. Hey, Tom, I just wanted to offer a different perspective. I'm a real estate appraiser that goes into houses every day a lot of people want to take advantage of the low rates, or they need money because they're at home hurting. So we have a really high volume of going into diverse homes. And roughly a little over a month ago, I'd wear the protective gear, and some houses, you could pretty much walk up and by their facial reaction, you knew what their news outlet was. Some people are appreciative, some people you could see the other reaction. About 3 weeks ago or so, you saw more of the country kind of, all right, we're in this together, and more people, similar reaction across the board. This past week or so, I don't know if it's because of what they're seeing what's happening in Michigan, but to the point you're making earlier, some of these people, it's now they feel it's their opportunity to protest. We go to some homes, they're thankful, but more and more, there's people who complete disregard, where there's people sick at home, they're not even informing us that they're ill. Yesterday, people just literally laughing in my face. They're not wearing a mask, but they were just mocking me. Person following me out to my car as I'm trying to remove myself from the situation. So that is starting to happen. 2 days ago, appraised a house with 9 people in it. There's not supposed to be 9 people in the house. None of them were wearing protective gear. And again, laughing, mocking, whatever. So I'm at the point now where I've told the lenders I'm going to be out of protective gear, and I'm going to stop doing this because I have frail family members that I can't put at risk, and I don't want to get my clients sick. So I feel I'm already starting to see exactly what you're saying. Some of those people are taking it in their own hands, and they're starting to judge us wearing a mask. It's not that hard to wear the protective gear. It's not that hard to do the things we're supposed to do, but for some reason now they're making it a struggle and then taking it as their opportunity to protest. So definitely seeing that happen.
Yeah, they think they're owning the libs when in fact what they're doing is putting their lives at risk. And they're doing this because they watch Fox News and listen to right-wing hate radio.
Yep.
That's so sad. That's so sad. David, thank you for that story.
Yep.
I'm saddened to hear it.
I appreciate what you guys did.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks a lot, David. Good hearing from you. Amazing. Another caller from Florida here, Bob in Naples. Hey, Bob. Thanks for listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
Hi, how you doing? I just want to say that Trump has been corrupt. He's been a corrupt grifter since the early 80s. And I want to say about Biden is he needs to debate against Trump, that he needs to do the same model of FDR to make it illegal, the corporations that buy back. He needs to make it legal because that's why we were in this mess. And and not only that, he needs to say that he will straighten not only Social Security, Medicaid, because Trump, I mean, he broke his promise in 2006, and he said, it's on tape, he said that he was not gonna touch it, not gonna cut it, and he's doing the opposite. And those protesters that protested over there in Michigan, those with the machine guns, they should be arrested as a terrorist. That's what they are.
I agree. I believe that this is. I'm not certain they should be arrested just for showing up with a gun. But when you break into the Capitol building, yes, by all means, that is terrible. Bob, thank you for the call. Chris in Astoria, Oregon, a beautiful town. Hey, Chris, what's up?
Oh yeah, I love it here, Tom. Hey, in regards to the caller earlier about the Trump media machine, there's a guy named Rick Wilson who's part of a group called the Lincoln Group. And
right, he wrote a book called Everything Trump Touches Dies. And the Lincoln Group is with George Conway, Kellyanne's husband.
Oh, yeah. And have you seen that video they put out, Morning in America, except it's M-O... Okay. So there is some stuff going on. Yeah, it was beautiful, but there is some stuff going on. And I moved here from Maine, and I love it here in Astoria. It's beautiful place. Have
you been up to the top of the tower, the Astor Tower?
Yeah, I rode my bike up.
Incredible?
Well, I haven't. I think that's closed, but I rode my bike up to the top of the hill there, and it's quite a ride.
It's closed for the virus?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a shame, because if you get up in the top of that tower, I mean, you can see, it's like, you can almost see the curve of the earth. I mean, it's just, you can certainly see the Pacific Northwest, the Columbia River. It's one of my favorite things, but it makes sense that they close it.
Yeah. But anyways, hey, thanks for being my voice out there.
You're welcome, Chris. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for your kind words.
Bye-bye.
And good talking with you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Are you starting to see the backlash to the masks like our caller earlier from Florida?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think I am. It was the day before yesterday, Louise and I had a second runner run right by us within inches of us. And welcome back. Let's see here. James in Burnsville, West Virginia. Hey, James, what's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Hartman. Thank you for taking the call. Hey, I found out something the other day. Our nurses at the VA hospital, they're only given 2 masks for a month. Now, Trump and Kushner stole millions of protective equipment from the VA hospitals and the veterans the other day. This 5-time draft dodger. This 5-time draft dodger has kicked every veteran in this country in the teeth. Everybody that's a veteran, everybody that's got a veteran as a family member, and everybody in the military needs to vote this criminal out when we go to the polls in November. Look what he did to the guy in the Navy. That Theodore, it's got over 1,000 cases of that COVID-19 now, and they kicked him out. Now, I hope whoever the next president is puts him over the Navy. And thank you.
Yeah, that was Captain Crozier. Go ahead, James.
The swamp that Trump was going to try to get rid of? Well, he got rid of it. It's longer, it's deeper, it's wider, and now it's a sewer.
Yeah, I'm with you. James, you live in West Virginia. Good friend of mine lives in West Virginia. His sense of it is that people are starting to wake up, although a lot of people are still just burying themselves in the Fox News bubble. What's your sense of how things are going in Burnsville and communities around there? Do you think that people are starting to realize what's going on? Obviously, they have at your local VA.
Well, sir, a few of my friends has finally seen. They voted for him the last time. They said there wouldn't be no way they'd vote for this criminal again. But I've got 2 or 3 other friends that I just can't talk to them about it because they get mad. And I don't know. I think it's something like a cult. You know, like Hitler did in Germany. I really think that's what's going on.
Yeah, yeah. With your friends who have woken up, what was it that pushed them over the top?
Well, all the lies. He's told over 18,000 lies, and it finally sunk in that he's committed adultery on every one of his wives. He's been nothing but a thief his whole life.
Yeah, I get it. James, thank you for the call. Excellent points all. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I'm trying to be thematic to part of your show today, which is how are we going to get over Trump when he's gone? And I've got it broken down into 2. I think we're going to be able to repair our government and make it even better once he's gone, and we get some progressive voices. That's what I think, to Reconstruction. But the other one is a kind of a moral code. I want to give you a short story. As you might remember, I have large displays and banners and stuff like that, and I'd go to where population is. And on July 4th, 2018, I was doing my civil information in front of the parade, the 4th of July parade. And my theme that day was feminism. I call it pink. And I had a big banner that said, elect and sustain matrilineal governances. And 4 white male boys in the middle school band went by hollering Trump, 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 and gave me the middle finger. So we have some moral rebuilding to do.
Yeah, to say the very least. Robin, thank you for that story. And thanks for the work you're doing out there. Good on you, Robin. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jonathan in Warwick, Massachusetts. Hey, Jonathan, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. Thanks for the call and your program. Well, I think there's a lot of problems with the divider-in-chief. And he sent us on a course that we don't see where we can agree together. So, but I end up agreeing with some of my rightist type of friends because there is truth about the foreign policy of the both governments, both parties, following along and giving cover for each other through most of history, especially since 9/11.
Actually, since 1992, yes. I mean, the Democratic Party was opposed to free trade agreements prior to 92. Clinton changed that. But the Democratic Party itself has never really embraced that. You've all, to this day, probably solidly half, and I would say probably 3/4 of the Democratic Party still holds to the belief that we should have protectionist trade policies.
Yeah, so Trump used these false issues that he said he would use truth to lie to people in order to get the independent vote and the person that's upset with the other side. And so all his promises didn't come true. I mean, he didn't release the JFK files. He didn't do 9/11 investigation. All these things he promised. He even promised universal health care. But that was to get elected. Once he got elected, it appears the GOP is pulling his strings, where he just makes his deal and serves his narcissistic ego.
Yeah, I don't even think it's the GOP, Jonathan. I think it's the right-wing billionaires who fund so much of the GOP and, who are responsible. And if Robert Mercer hadn't thrown all that money into Trump's campaign, he wouldn't be here. If he hadn't paid Cambridge Analytica to do the research, and put together those Facebook ads, Trump wouldn't be president. So I think he's beholden to the right-wing billionaires.
Ray McGovern called it Mickey Matt, military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank group. And so, yes, the money people have organized or made this coalition, and I'm not sure what's going to get us out of it. And I'm a little bit concerned about, the way the politics is going on, because we're still getting into this division, and there's questions about the whole health industry not being for health, but being for profit, and the vaccines and the way they've been treating health for all these decades also has led into a control of people. So there's a lot of division in that, and there's understanding that there should be fear, but there should be, let's deal with those underlying health issues so we can allow our own antibodies to develop immunity to these things. If we trust external vaccines all the time, there's other stuff in there that might hurt the immune system, and then another virus comes and we're still in the same place. I think the human body is so much more advanced.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jonathan. Thank you very much for the call. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you, and hello to everyone. Tom,
good.
My concern is, I guess first let me make this statement. I think it is disrespectful to our medical professionals if you don't wear a mask and try to adhere to everything that could mitigate this virus, Tom. I just think it's a disgrace, and I think it's disrespectful to them.
I agree.
Secondly, Tom, the virus itself, I don't think I hear enough about the fact that it circulates in the air conditioning systems and the ventilation system of buildings.
Yes.
And we heard that the super spreader, that's how it was in a Chinese restaurant, if I'm not mistaken. So
yes,
I'm thinking that the same thing could occur here, and we're not talking about it, particularly when we look at the clusters in the nursing homes, which are being devastated, as well as some of the manufacturing plants and the meat plants. So just discussion, Tom, about that I think is important, and we need to know more about that. And if I may, Tom, talk about Ahmaud Arbery, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
The concern is that, Tom, as Black people, we're not only dealing with the COVID-19, right, and how that is ravaging the community, but we also have to deal with that as a Black person, particularly Black men, that you're being harassed and accosted because you even wear a mask. Mm-hmm. We had an elected official who was stopped while driving his vehicle.
Yeah, he was a state
representative. He had on his mask. Exactly. Yep. And not only that, we still have to deal with the elements of racism. So this man, Mr. Arbery, and he was jogging, and the two people were, I guess in Georgia, you can make a citizen's arrest, so to speak.
Yes. They said that's what they were doing. I'm not buying it.
Neither, Tom. And I saw the video, and it ended in his death. So on top of everything else, Tom, we're still dealing with the racism.
Yep, absolutely, Pam. Absolutely. Pam, thank you so much for the call. And marginalized communities across the country are still dealing with bigotry. The gay community, the trans community, the Hispanics, Muslims, Native Americans, right across the board, which is not to minimize what's happening to African Americans. We need to acknowledge all of these issues and come together as a people.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Thank you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question, in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on. as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize. Because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we have giant hornets that are crawling out of the woodwork, or out of the hives now in the Pacific Northwest. They're being called murder hornets. I got an email, honest to God, I actually got this email. It's got a picture of one of these hornets, and it says, murder hornets are a false flag operation by the deep state to distract from the cabal of libtards and Democrats trying to cover up the creation of a biological weapon developed in Wuhan, China, dispersed by chemtrails to turn everyone into gay, child-molesting pizza gators who will outlaw the Second Amendment and steal our guns. Right. Well, back in the day at MSU, I had a professor who was an entomologist and he was a rather humorless fellow. He used to get very, very upset whenever I would refer to insects as bugs. But I love entomologists, and one of them is on the line with us right now, Professor Gard W. Otis, who's an adjunct professor of behavioral ecology and agriculture at the School of Environmental Sciences in Ontario, Canada, at the University of Guelph, and Guelph, Guelph. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. Dr. Otis's Twitter handle is UOFG, and the website is uoguelph.ca/SES. Dr. Otis, welcome to the program.
Yeah, hi, thanks for having me on.
So I'm guessing that these giant hornets that are referred to in the popular press as murder hornets, I know you have an actual name for them, a real name, are an invasive species, but B, probably not something we're going to be able to get rid of. Where are we at with this? Who are these bugs and where did they come from?
Well, they clearly must be from the deep state, and they came out of a lab in China, and they're undoubtedly here to destroy our entire society. And with that little spoof there, after your lead-in comments,
thank you, sir.
They are.
My email was right.
What's that?
My email, the guy who sent me this email was right.
I would love to have that email because that's a classic. I love it.
I will forward it to you.
Yeah, so these are really large hornets. There are two species, actually, that are virtually identical in what they look like, in their behavior, and pretty much everything they do. One of those species, is the more northern one, is the one that was detected last fall out in Washington State, very close to the Canadian border, and also in British Columbia, just into Canada. There was one colony destroyed in Vancouver Island, which clearly must be a separate introduction from the mainland sites. And there was a beekeeper who had a colony that got chopped to death by hornets late in the year in Washington State near Bellingham, which also indicates there was a separate colony there to have that effect. So they're there. They're not yet common. We're not even sure they're yet fully established. And the two species together, I refer to them as giant because they're huge, 2 inches long. Asian, because they come from Asia. Hornets, because they are a group of insects referred to as hornets.
So, number one, first of all, if they came from Asia, they were there in Asia for a while. How many people, what part of Asia did they come from? How many people typically die from contact with them? How have they altered the ecosphere, as it were, or the local, terrain? Biological terrain there that might inform us how they might alter things here. How do people alter their behavior to avoid being stung by these things? I understand they can kill a person. If a bunch of them sting you, it kills you. If with a single one can kill a small animal like a mouse. So what do we know about these things that? Or what do you know about them? Scientists know about them that we should know about them, particularly those of us in the Pacific Northwest who might encounter them. And then my follow-up question would be, how fast will it take for them to spread across the rest of the United States?
That was a lot of questions at once.
Yeah, sorry.
So perhaps you visited Asia in one of your travels. I don't know, but I'm sure many of your listeners have traveled to Asia. And I will bet 100% that you never got any warnings to watch out for giant Asian hornets. They are not something that the average person out and about, even in Asia and China and Japan and Vietnam and even down to Singapore, where they encounters between people out and about doing normal activities, would interact with them in a way that would get them stung. They are very passive when they're away from their nests or away from a colony of bees they might have attacked and taken over. So, on general, they're not all that scary. You ask so many questions there at once. I get lost with that.
Well, the subset of that, I suppose,
they are in Washington State, and one of your questions was, what's the likelihood they'll get out of there, like continue to colonize across North America? The species that's there now is the more cold-adapted species, as I mentioned briefly. I don't know exactly where it's from. To do that, you need to have samples from Asia that you can type, like do the DNA genetic typing, and then compare your samples from North America. And I don't think we have enough samples from Asia to even begin to meaningfully do that yet. So we don't know exactly what part of Asia they were from. We don't know if they're in their preferred habitat right now or if they're really in sort of a marginal habitat compared to where they originated back across the ocean. So the first thing they have to do is they have to successfully colonize and actually produce a sustaining population. And it's amazing how many insects and plants make it here but then die out and never actually establish populations. It happens all the time. So that has to happen first, and there's going to be an army of people out there, including citizen scientists, putting up traps for these things they're going to monitor to try to figure out where they are, how common they are, get the samples, do the DNA analysis to figure out how genetically diverse they are, because that has a big impact on whether they can adapt to the new situation. And by the end of a year from now, we'll have a much better idea, I think, what's going on. And then they're on the west side of the mountains, and there's high mountains basically from British Columbia all the way down into Southern California almost. So, and they're not going to make it around across the desert. So the way they're going to get across the mountains is probably the same way they got to western North America in the first place, which is through wintering queens. So the queens, the colonies at the end of the season, they get fairly large. They can get up to like 500 to 1,000 hornets in a single nest. They're very impressive colonies. And they then switch over and produce a batch of new queens, maybe 50 or 100 queens per colony, per nest, and a group of males. They mate, and then those mated queens go off and overwinter. And when they're overwintering, there's about a 5-month period there where they could be in packing material or a load of lumber or something like that, and they could get shipped across the country. So I'm not going to say they're not somewhere else in the eastern part of the North America, but I would say the chances of it are extremely, extremely low at this point in time.
Yeah, most of our timber seems to be moving from the West Coast to Asia right now, where they, make it into furniture and
well, there's lots of other goods that they could end up in a rail car or something that they could come across the country with. So, but it's going to be a random thing, and people want to know, like, well, when do I expect them? It's like, well, when do you expect to win the lottery? Could happen tomorrow. Buy your ticket, but it's not likely.
We have just a half a minute till we're going to hit a hard break I can't control here. How are they changing the ecology? I mean, they seem to like to eat bees. Are our pollinators at risk?
Probably not. They really like to focus when the colonies get large toward the end of the summer. They like to focus big sources of food like honeybee colonies. And when they do that, they actually recruit a bunch of females, a bunch of worker wasps to the nest, and then they attack en masse, and our bees just literally have no defenses against them, so they get chopped up, and then the wasps haul all the baby bees, the larvae, and the pupae back to their own colony to feed them for the next couple of weeks.
Yikes. Dr. Gard Otis. Dr. Otis, thanks so much for dropping by today and talking with us.
All right, thanks. I'm glad to talk to you. Thank you so much.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's a quarter after the hour. Stick around. More of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Let's see, who's been on hold the longest here? Tim in Seattle. You've been on hold a half hour, 35 minutes. What's up, Tim?
Thank you, sir. Always listen to your show. I love it. I learn so much.
Thank you.
I listen on your side. I listen on Sirius 127 and Bellevue Community College. Give them all a little shout out.
Oh, great. So what's on your mind, Tim?
I feel bad for our conservative brothers in the country. My heart goes out to them. They're just so confused and they're brainwashed and they are uneducated. And I would love to see us really start to spend money like we have been with doing the great documentaries about the environment changes and put it into trying to re-educate these people. If we can't break through the wall of Fox TV and Limbaugh and stuff, go, okay, fine, but we could go down and spend money. I don't mean to pick on the South, but let's just say, for example, is there any money that I don't know about? Is there a background people who are really to invest in billboards? Going to invest in, those little signs you see on a shopping cart? I mean, just really kind of Let's spend the
The
money.
billboard
behind
thing is
enemy lines.
big right now in Kentucky. You know, there's this whole series of billboards in Kentucky that they're putting up along the major freeways that say Moscow Mitch. It's got Mitch McConnell rattled.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, if we can tap into more, like the caller a couple minutes ago, he had a Southern accent and he's fed up with Trump. If we can circle some of those people in and get them to have testimony and saying Trump lied to us. You know, he let me down.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about the guy from West Virginia who said that his local VA, they lost their masks because Kushner stole them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I like that Hillary brought those women out to say what Trump had done to them in 2016. Maybe next time we bring out all the people that he screwed over with job promises and breaking contracts and let them get in front of the camera. If I can also say one more thing, I am super proud of some parts of our government right now because I'm in standby layoff with my Teamster job, and unemployment that I paid into is absolutely working, and it's keeping my family afloat. So we've got to focus on the parts of government that does work, especially like what the Progressive Caucus have pushing forward.
Yeah. Excellent, Tim.
Can
Thank you very much for the call.
Please?
Spot on. Yes, sir. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, just real quick. I think we all need to stop saying that the media isn't right and the media doesn't do this and the media doesn't do that, because we shouldn't be even following mainstream media. We should be listening to your show, Democracy Now!, Ralph Nader. I mean, all of these places that are bringing the truth. I don't care what the Spokane Review says or even the LA Times. I mean, we need to only concentrate on what real media is.
Well, I don't disagree that there's a lot of good stuff to be found on this show and on Amy Goodman's show and Stephanie Miller and Randy Rhoads, et cetera. But I would add to that if you don't know what's being said in the main corporate media, in the CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post media, and if you don't know what's being said over on Fox News, that you are less prepared to deal with people when they want to discuss politics with you. You really need to know what are the memes out there. You know, what are the positions that people are taking. So anyway, I try to share as much of that as I can with people. Tim, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. And I try to process some of that stuff and share it with you and give you the information. There was a whole thing about, they think that they're, by harassing people who are wearing masks, they're owning the libs. I mean, this is a thing now, right? And it's going to get worse. We'll be back.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, if you want to avoid hassle, just decorate your mask with the stars and stripes. Exit from any hassle.
There you go. That's actually a good idea. If you don't want right wingers to think that you're being, it's so sad that we have to do this. Anyhow, Mike, continue.
Yeah, I called because you were painting a picture at the top of the show about how secure Trump is in the White House, where they test everybody. But just before that, I'd been reading a Med website, and they're pointing out that these testing regimes are less than 100% accurate. For instance, the most frequently used one, the PCR test, which would be from a nasopharyngeal swipe, has sensitivity, they say, of 40 to 60%. So if you are ruled positive by that test, it's very specific. However, it's not a rule out by any means. Even the blood test won't, prevent false negatives from happening because it takes weeks for the immunoglobulins to develop. So the long and the short of it is that I think perhaps Mr. Trump is being exposed more than we might suspect, from the amount of testing that's going on.
Did you see him on TV last night when he was at that, or maybe it was the night before last, but I'm pretty sure it was last night. They were showing the footage of him at the Honeywell plant, or afterwards. He was sitting and speaking to reporters, I believe. And it looked to me, I don't know if it was just a bad camera, but his shirt was white, but his face, instead of being orange, was bright red. And I walked right up to the TV. I said, Louise, look at this. And we walked right up to the TV, and it looked like his face was all red and blotchy. And I said, I think he's got COVID. I mean, he looks like he's fighting an infection. And, it might have just been an artifact of television. I don't know, but that was a weird little
maybe
moment
color
last night.
balance.
Did you catch that, Mike?
Yeah. I noticed, he looked weird, but he always looks weird to me. By the way, I hope you'll join my campaign, which is there's an old fire service slogan, right behind you, Cappy. In other words, if your leader's telling you it's safe to go in that building, you'll follow them right in. So I think if he's ordering these meat packing plants to reopen by his authority as war commander, I think we should say right behind you, Captain Trump, and ask him to work one shift as an apprentice meat packer or meat cutter in one of these plants that they've shut where all the people have turned positive. And once he does that, we will know
Jared
he's
and
a
Ivanka.
real... Yeah, that... Perhaps.
Yeah, send in Jared and Ivanka. Let them show them how to do this. I mean, Jared's in charge of the task force, so yeah. Mike, thanks. That's a good one. Taya in Blackfoot, Idaho. Hey, Taya, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. It's Taya, and
Taya,
I'm in a very conservative. That's okay. I'm in a very conservative area, of course, here in Idaho. Can you hear me? Okay.
Just fine.
Okay. The reason I called is because I think some misinformation has been given out in regard to unemployment insurance. I worked for the state for 30 years, and about 8 of those years I worked in unemployment insurance and dealt with claims and so on. And because a person quits a job does not mean they're automatically ineligible for unemployment. If they quit with good cause, and it's proven that they quit with good cause, they can always be allowed and can receive their unemployment. Same thing with being fired. If somebody gets fired, but it wasn't for just cause, then they can still get their unemployment if they have to prove. The burden of proof is always on the person that quit the job. And if they get fired, the employer has to prove they fired them with just cause. And so I kind of worry about this common thing I keep hearing, if they quit, they'll lose their unemployment. They may not. If my job was in danger, if I went to work, I think that's good cause. I'm sorry, but
well, Taya, I know that there's a variation between states. These are all state laws, and different states have different criteria for what makes you eligible for unemployment.
There are federal guidelines.
But I know as an employer, I get if an employee is claiming unemployment. I've had two employees in the last couple of years claim unemployment. One was a part-time person that we laid off relatively recently. And the other was somebody who didn't want to move from Washington, D.C. to Oregon with us and stayed in D.C. and filed unemployment. In both cases, we encouraged the unemployment folks to simply pay them. We didn't contest them. But the unemployment, for those two states, both reached out to us as the employer and said, is this a legitimate claim? But I know that there's a lot of employers who routinely contest those claims. And then the person, and I would think that would be the case in people who don't want to go to work because they're afraid of getting COVID, but their employer is saying, hey, no big deal, we believe in Trump. And when the employer contests that claim, it can be very, very difficult to get your unemployment money.
And not, too. I had a situation, a really good example, where a guy was working in a processing place, and there was a big equipment on top over his head, and it was being held by one bolt. Somebody hadn't fixed it. And he complained and filed, reports on it forever. And finally, he just was really scared that this thing was going to fall on him, and he quit, and he went and filed for unemployment. Well, the employer fought it tooth and nail. They talked to other workers, and they decided that he had good cause for leaving that particular part. There was no place else for him to go, because he did try to transfer out, too. He made an effort to get away from this.
But then you've also got the situation where the mayor or the governor of Iowa 3 or 4 days ago said, if you don't show up to work in your meat processing plant because you're afraid of COVID, you no longer qualify for unemployment. She just came right out and said it. Kim Reynolds, I believe is her name.
Boy, I would push that all the way up. I'm sorry, but you can always have redeterminations. You can always, file a redetermination. It can go up, clear up to the state. I don't know.
But are the offices even open anymore with all this?
Yeah, they are.
Taya, I've got to run. I'm glad that, good people like you were working, or you were working. I'm sure that there's a lot of them like you who are working in these unemployment offices. I'm glad to hear that. There's a little bit of humanity there. Taya, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Thank you for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be back here after a few minutes break at the bottom of the hour. I'll be picking up your calls. It's 28 minutes past the hour. We'll be short.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here on the place where despair is not an option.
Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago Prize. In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. The barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barber shop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offutt left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. And in 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Byrne's group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, bragging rights that not even money could buy, and this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default. The book Dark Towers by David Enrich.
It's amazing. Cleaner air during the pandemic is proving the benefits of a decarbonized economy. Dr. Jay Family-Eddy is here on how the number of people harmed by floods will double worldwide by 2030. In Geeky Science, don't miss the 7 things that happen when you stop eating meat or eat less meat during this pandemic. And our fact of the week is about plummeting wildlife and extinctions. Check out The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Terry in Hilo, Hawaii. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hey, Tom, what's going on? Hey, Tom, I've been thinking, and I've been watching and going over old stuff about the news ever since the virus came and beyond.
Terry in Hilo, Hawaii? Hey, Terry.
Yeah, Tom. Terry here. Hello? Hello?
Uh-huh.
Hello, Tom. All right, Tom, you got it. Tom, do you have me? Hello, Tom.
Yeah, no, I'm listening
here
to you. Apparently, we got a whole chunk of latency here on the internet, Terry. So just do your riff, and there'll be a pause, and then I'll come back and respond to you.
Okay, this virus thing, I think the Trump administration and McConnell and all are using this virus to suppress the vote. That's why they don't have all the testing stuff in the blue states, but they have it in the red states. So they're using this. That's why they're opening up businesses for they can complete their complete and bring the voting for the Democrats down by killing off the people. That's why they're opening up the states and the businesses and stuff like that. It's just a thought. Must be one heck of...
Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago
And it's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club.
In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. The barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barber shop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offutt left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. And in 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Burns Group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, bragging rights that not even money could buy, and this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default. The book Dark Towers by David Enrich. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is called Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College by Jesse Wegman. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 20. But what exactly can we do about the Electoral College? People have been trying to answer that question for more than 2 centuries. Since the first proposed amendment to the Electoral College was introduced in Congress in 1797, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or abolish it, more by far than any other provision of the Constitution. Only one has succeeded, the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 to fix a technical flaw in the college's design, but left it otherwise intact. In the late 1960s, an amendment abolishing the college and replacing it with a national popular vote passed the House of Representatives and came extraordinarily close in the Senate, but was blocked by a filibuster. At the time, 80% of the American public supported switching to the popular vote, as did President Richard Nixon and other top Republicans and Democrats. To sum this litany of failures speaks to itself. "I think it's a waste of time to talk about changing the Electoral College," former President Jimmy Carter said in 2000. Carter had supported a national popular vote in the 60s and the 70s. "I would predict that 200 years from now we'll still have the Electoral College," he said. Was President Carter right? Is it simply our fate as Americans to remain trapped by the historical quirks of a Constitution that is too easy to revere and too hard to change? Especially after the failed effort in the 60s, when American politics were far less polarized to today, and there was no simple partisan divide over the issue. It's clear that a constitutional amendment is not in the cards. But there may be another way. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, an agreement among states to award all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote rather than the winner of their statewide vote. The compact will take effect when it is joined by states representing a majority of electoral votes, 270, thus guaranteeing that the candidate who wins the most votes in the country becomes president. The ingenuity of the compact is that it doesn't touch the Constitution. Its target is the statewide winner-take-all rule, currently in use in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. This rule is what makes presidents out of popular vote losers. It incentivizes presidential campaigns to ignore more than 100 million American voters living in non-competitive states, turning what should be a national electoral contest into a series of bitter hyperlocal brawls. It focuses nearly all campaign spending and policy proposals on a few so-called battleground states, where even a small shift in voting can lead to an electoral jackpot for one side or another. That familiar red and blue map we all obsess over every 4 years, it's nothing but a visual representation of state winner-take-all rules, with each state stamped Democratic or Republican, as though that is its true identity, regardless of how many voters from the other party cast a ballot there. This is bad for democracy, and it should concern all Americans, no matter where they live or which political party they support. In contrast, when candidates know that all votes are equal and they need a majority of them to win, they're forced to seek the support of all Americans and craft policies that appeal to as many people as possible. The Popular Vote Compact was launched in 2006 and got its first member state, Maryland, the following year. As of October 2019, 15 states in the District of Columbia, together representing 196 electoral votes, had joined. 74 more, and the compact takes effect. So far, only Democratic majority states have joined the compact. And while the 2016 election dealt a significant setback to efforts to enlist Republican-led states, lawmakers of both parties around the country continue to support it, and Republican-led chambers have passed it in 4 states. Critics of the compact call it an end run around the Constitution. And it's true that the Constitution's framers never mentioned something like a popular vote compact. They also never mentioned the winner-take-all rule, but that didn't stop the majority of states from rapidly adopting it to benefit themselves. That's the whole point of the compact. The framers gave states near total control over how to allocate their electors. The fact that the compact is an agreement among states also means that, unlike a constitutional amendment, which is effectively permanent, member states may back out if they later decide they don't want to be a part of it.
The Democratic Party
opponents of the popular
appealing
vote
weak
argue
to
that
people,
no
and
matter how
people are
you might
losing
achieve it, it's
confidence
not
in
the
them,
way.
and there's a good reason for it. First of all, Kamala Harris chose not to prosecute Mnuchin, right?
Yeah.
So I don't see her as an option as far as a vice presidential candidate goes. I don't buy it. Elizabeth Warren for me. I'm a Bernie guy. I was disappointed, but I'm voting for Biden, no doubt. But I really think the Democratic representatives need to do something more in the offense way rather than defense. When Bill Barr said to Nancy Pelosi, "Did you bring the cuffs?" She should have had the cuffs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand why they just let this stuff go. I don't want to hear Jared Kushner speak. He didn't pass the security clearance. So Trump can just put him anywhere he wants, and that's wrong. And if I hear Nancy Pelosi again say, "You've been impeached, that's forever," so what? Who cares?
Yeah. Well, certainly that's how Trump thinks of it.
One more thing, please. I'd like to see Pelosi defend Michael Cohen and tell that Trump should not be allowed to send him back to jail, and let him publish his book and get it out there.
I'm with you, John. I'm absolutely with you. Thanks for the call. We'll be back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. My apologies for the crash there. This is, the wonders of doing your show from home. We have business service here in our house, commercial service, but it's from Comcast. So of course, from time to time it goes down, and sure enough, it just went down. But I think things are working now. Terry in Hilo, Hawaii, you want to try that again?
Hello, Tom. I'm over here holding on to the palm trees. You know how they sway during the trade wind.
There you go. Okay. What's on your mind, Terry?
Yeah. This is just a thought, and about this virus thing that McConnell told Trump that we're going to use this virus to suppress the vote. See, they have the testing in the red states, but they don't have it in the blue states and stuff like that. So they're using this. That's why he's opening up the thing. We got to get our country back, and stuff like that. And so it's just an observation, and I think they're using it to suppress.
I think so too. I'm not sure that that's the exact mechanism, but there's no doubt in my mind that they're doing the very best they can to figure out the best ways that they can to use this virus to get Trump reelected. Spot on. I absolutely, completely, totally agree with you.
Because
anyhow, thanks a lot for the call.
All right, thank you.
I got to move along, Terry. Thank you. Mark in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. Hey, Mark, it says you disagree with me?
Well, no. First, I said I called because I want to compliment you. You love the value. You have the value of life, and people should be saved from this virus. Do you give the same attitude toward the unborn children? The ones that are.
You want to turn this into a discussion about abortion? Really? I'm not even going to bother. David in Torrance, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Yes, actually, I want to talk about the same subject because I'm noticing that in some circles, people are getting numb to lots of lies and forgetting that every single one that's out of these 75,000 people are individuals with family and friends who love them. And I want to urge all the journalists to show all the emotions and empathy that they feel, and leave the journalistic objectivity for some other time, because this is one thing that we all need.
Yeah. I'm with you, David. I made this point a couple days ago, but most people only listen to little bits of the show. But my point was that right now, the vast majority of people who have had somebody die from this disease are in the Northeast. They're in New York or New Jersey, and I mean that's more than half of them. Or they're people who have had people die in nursing homes and things like that. It has not yet really hit middle-class white America. And that's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months, particularly if the country goes along with Trump's attempts to open up the country. And when that happens, and people start knowing people who got just hemorrhagic syndrome that we're seeing, or whose relatives or parents or grandparents died, then I think the country, even red state America, is going to start to turn on Trump. So far, for them, it's just something. In Grand Rapids. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Hey, I may have been the first guy to be attacked.
You want to call about the murder hornets, Peter?
Hello.
I am not hearing Peter. Peter, you got to listen to your phone, not your TV. Dave in Stillcom, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Yes, sir. Hey, love your program.
Hey, Dave, you're on the air. He's talking to somebody. Okay. I'm fading? Oh, no. Charisse.
Hi. I just wanted to say that I listened to Beto O'Rourke yesterday on MSNBC, and he brought up something so... Pardon me?
Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington?
Yes. Yeah. Hi.
Oh,
hello?
Okay.
Hello?
Hi, Charisse.
Hi.
Yes, I hear you. Okay. Charisse, for some reason, I'm getting weird messages here. Sean is telling me she can't hear you. I was hearing you just fine, but I'm sorry. We've got 30 seconds here to wrap up the show. I don't know if we're having another Comcast problem or not. One of the heads up that I want to share with you is this COVID-19 infodemic on Facebook, where all these stories about how, the deaths are overstated and just go back to work and it's just like the flu, et cetera, et cetera. Look out for this stuff on Facebook and on other social media. When you see it, report it. Because this is a crime against humanity. I mean, it's just absolutely terrible. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It needs you, and progressive media needs you to tell your friends. If you can be a little contagious, right? Spread the word about progressive media. Infect somebody else today. Tag, you're it.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
Thank you.